Hello guys and welcome to my YouTube channel, Ruben's History Show. Привет, ребята, здравствуйте, мои друзья. So today I'm going to talk about the jokes on the Soviet leaders under Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev, and the three other leaders, Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. So there were not too many jokes on Comrade Lenin because Lenin didn't rule the country for a long time because he was in power for only 2 years. Brezhnev, sorry. Lenin was in power for just 2 years from December 30th, 1922, all the way to January 21st, 1924. So when Stalin came power, there were some jokes about him because he was watching a movie, he was watching a comedy, and then he was grinning throughout the entire movie. And so he started grinning throughout the entire movie, and he also liked watching movies of Ivan the Great, Ivan the Terrible, who was the king of Russia, I believe. And when the movie ended, he said, "Shoot him." And so those were kind of the jokes under Stalin's rule. I'm gonna have to see if that's what he actually said. I think that's what he said. So Stalin attempts the premiere of a Soviet comedy movie. He laughs and grins throughout the film, but after it ends, he says, "Well, I like the comedy, and he said, "Shoot him," basically, which is a little funny. And he said, "Everyone is speechless. Everyone is speechless until someone sheepishly regrets it." Comrade Stalin, he said, "Comrade Stalin, maybe the actor shaves off his mustache." Stalin replies, "Good idea. First shave, then shoot," which was kind of funny. Which were kind of funny jokes. And there was also a joke when the Nazi Germany was defeated by the Soviet Union on May 9th, 1945, when Nazi Germany capitulated and when the Soviets celebrated their victory over Germany. He said he didn't want to ride the horse because he was afraid he might fall off and break his neck or something, or break his back. So he didn't ride the horse, Stalin. It was Zhukov, who was the Soviet Yuri Zhukov, who was one of the Russian heroes of Stalingrad during the battle in 1942 to 1943. So, and there was also another joke. It says, at a May Day parade, a very old Jew carries a placard which reads, "Thank you, Comrade Stalin, for my happy childhood." A party representative approaches the old man. "What's that? Are you mocking our party? Everyone can see that when you were a child, Comrade Stalin hadn't been born yet." The woman replies, "That's precisely why I am grateful to him." Yeah, those were one of the jokes in the Soviet Union under Stalin time. And there's also another one. An old crone had to wait for 2 hours to get on the bus. Bus after bus arrived filled with passengers, and she was unable to sneeze herself in as well. When she finally did manage to chamber abroad one of them, she whispered to her forehead and exclaimed, "Finally, glory to God." The driver said, "Mother, you must not say that. You must say glory to Comrade Stalin." "Excuse me, comrade," the woman replied. "I am just a backward old woman. From now on, I'll say what you told me to." After a while, she continued, excuse me, comrade. I am an old and stupid. What shall I say if God forbid Stalin dies? Well, then you may say glory to God. So those were one of the jokes under Stalin time, when Stalin was in power. So after the death of Stalin, it was Comrade Khrushchev who became the General Secretary of Communist Party of the USSR on March 5th, 1953. So there was a joke that when Khrushchev visited a pig farm during that time, I think it was when he was in the United States, I believe. And then it said that the photographer took a picture of him surrounded by the pigs, and the photographer said that the pigs surround comrade Khrushchev, and that was kind of funny during that time. And there was also another joke in the 1960s. It was like September 1960 when Khrushchev came to the United States. He gave a speech and he took off his shoe and then he started banging it on the table. He said like, down with capitalism. And he started banging it on the table, which was kind of funny when he was giving the speech in the United Nations, when he was in the United States. And his nickname was Kukaruznik, which means someone who likes corn. That was his nickname. That was Khrushchev's nickname when he was leader of the USSR from 1953 to 1964, when he was overthrown by Comrade Khrushchev. Not Comrade Khrushchev, by Comrade Brezhnev. So after Khrushchev was removed from power, it was Leonid Brezhnev who became the new General Secretary of the first Secretary of Communist Party of the USSR on October 14, 1964, when he removed Khrushchev from power as first Secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And there were not too many jokes under Brezhnev, because when Brezhnev took power, he was 58 years old, so he wasn't sick or anything. He didn't have hard time speaking, which would take place maybe 10 years later, because if you remember in the 70s, he started getting really old and he started having problems reading this long hour speeches, also in the early 80s when he died. So when Comrade Brezhnev became leader of Soviet Union, there were not too many jokes during his rule, because he was young, and by the 1970s they started having a lot of jokes because he had big eyebrows, and he had big eyebrows on his head, and they started making fun of his eyebrows and what he looked like. And he also liked kissing people. I mean, not people, like kissing men on the lips. I mean, actually like kissing them on the lips. And it was kind of weird why he was kissing people on the lips. So he had trouble speaking and had trouble giving speeches in front of the communists in the early 80s and late 70s. So he had trouble speaking during that time. And if anyone remembers the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, or the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow, which was boycotted by the United States following the Afghan-Soviet War, which took place in 1979, in December of 1979. So he also read a speech in the Summer Olympics in Moscow, and he gave a speech, and he said, oh, and then another Soviet official said, Comrade Brezhnev, those are not O's, those are Olympic symbols. Those are the Olympic symbols. So you don't have to read them out loud to the people who attend the Olympics in Moscow. And then he said, and then that was it. And then he also said that, well, I think it was another Soviet official said to him, he said, Comrade Brezhnev, this guy is on the same page as Americans. You shouldn't trust this guy. And Brezhnev said, I know it, God damn it, but his kisses are so good. I'm gonna have to kiss this guy. So those were the jokes under Comrade Brezhnev from 1964 to 1982. We almost ruled the country for 18 years, but it was almost 20 years. It was so almost 2 decades he was in power as General Secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So after the death of Comrade Brezhnev, it was jokes under Andropov and Chernenko. And some of the jokes were in Soviet Union under the rule of Andropov, when Andropov took over as the leader of Soviet Union in November 1982 when Brezhnev died. And he said, okay, comrades, so all of you who voted for me, you could come and kiss me on the lips, on the cheek. So those were one of the jokes under former KGB officer and General Secretary of Communist Party of the USSR, Andropov. So that was kind of a funny joke, because people came to kiss Andropov on the cheek. And there was also another joke that he was also connected to a machine because he was very old. He was, and there was also some jokes of it right here. I could read them out to you right now. So Comrade Andropov is the most turned on man in Moscow. Why did Brezhnev go aboard while Andropov did not? Because Brezhnev ran on batteries, but Andropov needed an outlet, a reference to Brezhnev's pacemaker and Andropov's dialysis machine. So he was connected to a dialysis machine. Andropov was, when Andropov was leader of the Soviet Union. So those were some of the jokes of Andropov when he was leader of the Soviet Union. And that was pretty funny. And so after Andropov's death, it was Comrade Chernenko, who didn't last the country for a long time. He only ruled the country for about 1 year, from 1984, when Comrade Andropov died, when KGB officer or agent Yuri Andropov died, and Chernenko took over. And his parents, I think he was Ukrainian. Chernenko was Ukrainian, like Brezhnev and Chernenko. And there were also some jokes that like Chernenko was kind of like the second Brezhnev, because he had trouble speaking, and he was speaking heavily, and he had trouble speaking like Brezhnev. And people started calling Chernenko the second Brezhnev, because he started having trouble to speak. So those were one of the jokes of Chernenko while he was the leader. And there were not too many jokes of Chernenko while he was the leader or General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So there's not too many jokes on Chernenko. So the last leader of Soviet Union, I'm going to talk about Gorbachev, who became the leader of Soviet Union on March 11th, 1985, 3 hours after the death of Comrade Konstantin Chernenko, who died on March 11th, 1985. So Gorbachev took over as leader of Soviet Union following Chernenko's death, and people started. The first thing they noticed when they saw Gorbachev was he had this big birthmark. He had this big birthmark on his head, and people started calling his birthmark. They started calling Gorbachev the marked one, or the marked one or his birthmark, which was Satan's mark, and which was kind of funny. They called Gorbachev's birthmark the birth Satan's mark on his head, on his fourth head right here. And so that was kind of interesting. And there was also another joke that Gorbachev's wife, Lisa Gorbachev, she also started poking his nose, and which was kind of funny. And it was very funny because she started poking on his nose, which was kind of funny. And after that there was after that Soviet Union came down. So there's not too many jokes on Lenin because Lenin didn't rule for a long time. And there was also some jokes on the KGB, which was a Soviet police force, or the Russian version of the CIA. So there were some jokes. It said telling jokes about the KGB was considered to be like pulling the tail of a tiger, which was kind of weird. It was kind of funny. So yeah, that was interesting. So yep, so those are the Soviet and Russian political jokes today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and like my videos, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And I'm out.